She was made fun of for being the town's baby helper with no kids of her own until the alone rancher asked her to stay and raise his little ones. Mrs. Rancher had been born in the wanted alone rancher spot of the town's Middle West town of Dust, empty hotspot land, late fall 1878. The morning wind carried a bite of cold, sweeping dust along Dust Empty's main street. Wagon wheels rattled over hard-packed ground, and the wooden sign above stores General and Medicine creaked in the breeze. The scent of rub oil and dried plants drifted from the half-open door. Sarah May stepped inside, the chill sticking to her wrap. Her boots tapped the worn floorboards as she moved toward the counter, a list of healing plants folded neatly in her hand. Supplies for a lady out on the far edge of the valley due any day and already in trouble. The shop was quiet, but for the rustle of paper packs and clink of bottles, until two ladies by the shelves spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Did you hear who just walked in?" the first whispered, her voice carrying like a church bell. "The baby. Helper with no kids." The second snorted, glancing at Sarah. "A baby helper with no child of her own? If she'd been a mom, maybe she'd know more than plants and cutters." Sarah kept her eyes on jars of dried yellow flower and penny plant. Hands. Steady, though her fingers tightened around the list. The First Lady raised her voice. "If folks were smart, they'd keep their babies far from her. Heaven help any child she touches." Sarah's chest tightened, but she kept her breath even. She'd heard worse. She had survived worse. From the back, the door swung open. Heavy boots crossed the floor, and a broad-shouldered cowboy stepped up beside her. Weathered from the open range, hat dusted with cold, eyes the color of late summer grain. Before Sarah could turn, a skinny guy near the stove called out with a smirk. "Well, now if it ain't the baby doctor who never had a baby, if you're so good at bringing them into the world, why don't you get yourself one first?" A couple of men chuckled. Sarah turned to him, her voice calm and low. "You're in my way, mister. Step aside." Before he could speak, the cowboy's voice cut in, steady, carrying, like a whip crack. "That's enough." His gaze pinned the jeering man, his hand resting lightly on the end of his gun. "She's saved more lives than everyone in this room put together. If you've got a problem, take it outside and keep walking until you find someone who will listen." The shop went still. The man muttered and moved aside. The cowboy tipped his hat. Luke Callahan. "I run the Callahan Ranch out past Red Stream." "I know the place," Sarah replied. Luke stepped to the counter, laying down coins. "Add her supplies to my bill." "That's not necessary," Sarah began. "It is," Luke said softer now. "My boy's been coughing for days. My girl, she needs more than I can give alone. You'd be doing me a service, and I'd prefer you far from the mouths of fools like these." His gaze was steady, without pity. Sarah considered refusing, but the thought of her patient in the valley and two motherless kids tipped the scales. "I will. Come," she said. Luke picked up the packs and handed them to her. "Then let's get you out of here before someone decides to start talking again." The cold wind caught the door behind them, slamming it shut on the silent shop. Inside, no one spoke. Outside, the sign creaked overhead, but for the first time in weeks, the weight of the town's whispers felt a little lighter. The shiver lay low. The ride from town was quiet, but for the creak of seat leather and the occasional horse sound from Luke's horse. Sarah kept her gaze on the horizon, where golden grasslands rolled into tall trees, the air scented faintly, of dry grass and wood smoke. When the ranch came into view, it was larger than she'd thought. 2 barns, a wide animal pen, a weathered pine house with a porch stretching like open arms. Fences ran toward the hills, cows grazing in the distance. Luke got off first. "Welcome to Callahan Ranch," he said, nodding toward the porch where 2 small figures stood. Matthew, about 6, hair a little long, shirt untucked, stood with Ellie, no more than 3, clinging to his arm. Both were barefoot, faces streaked with dust. "This is Miss May," Luke called. "She's going to be staying for a while." Matthew's gaze was careful, measuring. Ellie hid behind him, peeking out only when Sarah smiled. "Hello?" she said gently. "I hear you two keep your papa very busy." Matthew's lips twitched but held back a smile. Ellie just gripped her brother tighter. Inside the house was warm, but bore the mark of a man alone. Boots by the door, dishes stacked, the fire low. "I wasn't sure how long you'd stay," Luke said, leading her down the hall. "But I had the spare room cleaned." Sarah paused in the doorway. The room was small but bright, a cover folded at the bed's foot. On the table, a clay jar of wild flowers blazed in vivid reds and yellows. In the corner sat a worn wooden rocking chair. "My wife used to sit there," Luke said quietly. "Thought you might like it for evenings." She turned to him, but he was already looking away. "Thank you," she said softly. The room felt like more than a place to rest. It felt like an offering. That evening, Sarah unpacked her small bag, setting her worn healing kit on the dresser. She had planned to stay only a few days to tend to Luke's kids. But as she moved in the kitchen later, preparing a simple supper, she could feel the emptiness. In the house, the kind no sturdy walls could hide. After supper, Ellie climbed into the rocking chair, tracing the armrests with small fingers. "Mama used to sit here," she murmured. "I imagine she was very kind," Sarah said, her chest tightening. Matthew, clearing dishes without being asked, looked up. "She was, but she's been gone a long time now." Luke returned from the barn, coat carrying, the cold night air. His eyes moved from his kids to Sarah, then to the chair, and he gave a small nod, as if to say she was in the right place. Later, with the kids asleep, Sarah stepped onto the porch. The grassland stretched under a sky scattered. With stars, the air sharp with plant. She remembered another porch, another home, before sickness took her hubby, and before the winter night, when her child came too soon to live. She had buried both within weeks, her heart closing over like a wound that never healed. From then on, she had delivered other ladies' kids, never letting herself belong to any family again. But tonight, hearing the faint creak of the rocking chair inside and seeing the wild flowers on the table, she felt something she hadn't allowed in years, an unspoken invite. And for reasons she couldn't quite name, she didn't push it away. It did not take long for the whispers to spread. By the end of her first week at the Callahan Ranch, Sarah could feel them like a draft under a closed door, slipping in no matter how tightly she wrapped herself in her work. At the general store, two men paused mid-talk as she entered, their eyes cutting from her to the sack of flour in her arms. In the churchyard on Sunday, the pastor's wife smiled politely, but Sarah caught the quick glance toward another lady, the faint shake of a head. In the drink spot, the talk was less polite. "Luke Callahan's got the baby helper without a family playing house out there," a ranch helper said over a glass of strong drink. "Wouldn't surprise me if she's after his land," another replied, drawing. A laugh from those close enough to hear. Even in the medicine spot, where she came only for supplies, Sarah felt it, the weight of eyes following her, measuring every step. She kept her chin level, her voice steady with the shopkeeper, but by the time she reached her wagon, her jaw ached from holding it tight. One evening, after a long day tending to Matthew's cough and Ellie's scraped knee, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark yard. The wind pushed dry snow across the porch, whispering against the walls. She did not see the figures moving in the shadows beyond the barn. Briggs did. Briggs was a broad man with a scar running from his head side to his jaw. The kind of man who made his living where law came slow, if at all. He and three others moved like they owned the darkness, slipping toward the side door. Inside the barn, Luke was finishing the last of the evening jobs. He heard the crunch of boots on frozen dirt where no boots should be. Sliding his hand covers off, he stepped into the path between barn and animal pen. "Evening, Briggs," Luke said, his voice low but carrying. The big man stopped, his friends fanning out just enough to look like a wall. "We're here for a word with your guest," Briggs replied, his tone oily. "She's sleeping," Luke said, "and I don't take kindly to folks prowling my yard after dark." Briggs grinned without funny. "Best for her to leave before folks get more riled up. Ain't good for a man's name keeping company like that." Luke stepped forward until there was barely a yard between them. The lamplight from the barn caught the steel in his eyes. "My name is my own concern, but you and your boys." He glanced toward the animal pen, where a gate hung open, the wind swinging at just enough to show a length of raw hide rope looped over the post. "You've been sloppy tonight." One of the younger men shifted, uneasy. "You came to scare her, Luke," continued, his voice quiet. "But I reckon you'd rather I not ride into town tomorrow and tell the sheriff whose boot tracks I found by my barn. Tracks I can follow straight to the sleep house you're staying in." Briggs's smirk faltered. Luke did not need to raise his voice. He just let the quiet stretch until the cold seemed to seep deeper into the skin. "Now," Luke said, tilting his head toward the road. "You can walk out of here and think better of your choices, or you can stay, and I'll make sure every ranch within 50 miles hears how you tried to sneak into a man's home after his kids were asleep." No one moved for a long breath. Then Briggs spat into the snow. "Come on," he muttered, turning away. The others followed, boots crunching until the sound faded into the night. Luke watched until they were gone, then shut the barn door, sliding the bar into place. He walked the around of the house once, checking the locks, making sure the covers were secure. Inside, Sarah was in the small sit-room, a book open in her lap. She looked up as he entered. "All done in the barn." Luke nodded, pulling off his coat. "All done." He did not mention Briggs or the open gate or the rope. There was no need to trouble her with it. Instead, he set another log on the fire and made a mental note to oil the hinges on the porch door in the morning. From her chair, Sarah watched the flames catch, unaware of the cold danger that had brushed past her window, and of the quiet line Luke had drawn in the dark to keep it from crossing her threshold. The trail to the truth was not long. Luke found it in the same place most gossip and dust empty started, over a bottle in the drink spot. He stood at the far end of the bar, hat low, listening while two ranch helpers traded news they should not have spoken aloud. "Told Briggs he'd get a nice payday if that baby helper packed her bags," one said, chuckling. "Yeah, richest family in the valley." Old man Whitmore, once his daughter settled at Callahan Ranch, says it's time Luke had a proper lady under his roof. Luke let the words sink in. So that was it. Briggs was no more than a hired threat, a piece in someone else's plan. The next morning, Luke went to see Sheriff Dawson. The two men sat in the back office, a single lamp burning, the cold thick on the window glass. "I want them caught where everyone can see it," Luke said. Dawson leaned back, chewing the end of a writing stick. "That means we make it public, but it has to look real, Luke." "It will," Luke replied. "I just need you and your helper ready to step in after I take the sting out of it." They set the plan in motion. 3 days later, word spread that Sarah May would be in town to collect healing supplies for the winter births. The news moved faster than it should have, exactly as Luke meant. On the set morning, Sarah walked the woodwalk toward Stores General and Medicine, unaware of the bait she carried simply by being there. Luke lingered near the metal worker, his eyes tracking every move in the street. The sheriff leaned against the post outside his office, pretending to roll a smoke. Briggs showed from the far end of the street, his long coat swinging with each step. 2 of his men sided him, hands loose near their gun belts. They fanned out just enough to push passers by to the edges of the street. Luke's heartbeat slowed, his breathing even. He watched Briggs's eyes fix on Sarah's back. The big man called out, voice carrying over the winter air. "Hey, baby helper." Sarah froze, half turning. Mr. Briggs, you got a bad habit of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, Briggs said, stepping closer. Some folks think maybe you need a reminder to leave before worse comes along. His hand dropped to his gun. The street went still. Luke moved. He stepped from the metal worker's doorway. In one fluid motion, his own gun clearing leather almost before the thought had formed. The crack of the shot split the quiet, bouncing off the wooden fronts of the buildings. Briggs's gun flew from his hand, spinning into the snow with a dull thud. The big man clutched his wrist, swearing. Luke's voice was calm, almost cold. That's enough. Every face in the street was turned toward them now. Shopkeepers in doorways, ladies clutching baskets, cow helpers frozen mid-step. You draw on her again, Luke went on. And next time I will not aim for the gun. Sheriff Dawson strode forward then, his sign catching the pale sun. Briggs, you and your boys just bought yourselves a trip to the jail. Seems you've been making trouble for hire, and I've got C's to prove it. Huh? The helpers moved in, binding Briggs' hands and marching the men away. Luke turned to Sarah. You all right? She nodded slowly, still staring at the gun, half buried in snow. I think so. He tipped his hat, his gaze steady on hers. Then let's get your supplies and head home. As they walked toward the medicine spot, the murmurs began. Not the sharp-edged whispers Sarah had grown used to, but a different kind of talk. She caught bits, never seen shooting that clean. Stood up for her. Guess she's not what folks were saying. For the first time since she had set foot in Dust Empty, the eyes on her felt less like judgment and more like something else, something closer to respect. Behind them, the snow in the street still held the print of Briggs's gun, a silent marker of the moment the tide had begun to turn. The snow had been falling since morning, heavy flakes drifting down from a sky the color of lead. By nightfall, the drifts lay deep against the porch rails and the wind howled across the open grass land. Inside, the house was warm, but a different kind of chill had settled over it. Ellie was sick. It had started with a cough 2 days ago, small, sharp, nothing that had seemed too worrying at first. But by evening, her little chest worked harder for each breath, her cheeks flushed with fever. Now she lay curled beneath the covers, sweat beading along her brow, her lips dry and pale. Luke hovered near the bed, his large hands useless against. The heat coming from his daughter's small frame. The snow's too deep to ride for the doctor, he said, voice rough. Sarah had already set her bag on the table and was sorting through jars and cloths. Then we do what we can here, she answered, calm but quick. Get me clean water and stoke the fire. She needs warmth, but not too much heat. Matthew stood in the doorway, eyes wide, clutching the bedpost. Is Ellie going to be all right? Her mouth opened, but only a squeak could Sarah turn to him, her tone steady. She will if we work together. Fetch more firewood and stay close. Through the long hours of the night, Sarah worked without pause. She brewed mixes from dried tree bark and wound plant, the steam carrying the bitter scent through the room. She cooled cloths in a bowl, laying them against Ellie's forehead, then replaced them before the heat could build again. When Ellie's breathing grew too shallow, Sarah lifted her gently, holding her upright to ease the strain on her lungs. She rubbed the girl's back in slow circles, murmuring soft words that were more rhythm than meaning. Luke brought water, then more wood, then sat helpless in the chair beside the bed. I've buried enough family, he said hoarse. I can't. You won't, Sarah cut in firm. Not tonight. The hours dragged. Outside, the wind battered the walls, but inside, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the clink of spoons against glass, and Ellie's ragged breaths. Near midnight, the fever spiked. Ellie whimpered, twisting weakly against the covers. Sarah soaked a fresh cloth and pressed it to the girl's neck, her own pulse quickening. She had seen too many kids lose this fight. And the memory of her own baby, tiny, fragile, slipping away in her arms, threatened to break her focus. She forced it back, keeping her hands steady. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered. "You're not going anywhere." Luke shifted beside her, his hand brushing the edge of the blanket. "Tell me what to do. Keep the water fresh," she said, "and talk to her. She knows your voice." So he did. He told Ellie about the spring babies, about the mom horse that would baby soon, about the stream, thawing, and the flowers she liked to pick. His voice was low and steady, filling the space between the storms of coughing. The night wore on. Sarah measured doses carefully, coaxing Ellie to swallow small sips. She placed her hand against the girl's chest, feeling for each breath, willing them to keep coming. Just before dawn, something shifted. The tight, shallow gasps eased into slower, deeper breaths. The fever's heat began to fade, replaced by a damp coolness against Sarah's palm. She sat back, letting out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "She's past the worst," she said softly. Luke's head lifted, eyes searching her face. "You?" "Sure." Sarah nodded. "She's out of danger now. She'll need rest, but she's going to be all right." Luke's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. He looked at his daughter, then back at Sarah. In the dim light of the fire, his eyes shone, red-rimmed, raw with relief. "Thank you," he said. The words rough, as if they had to push past something heavy in his chest. Sarah brushed a strand of hair from Ellie's damp forehead. "She's a strong one. You've raised her well." But when she glanced up, Luke was still watching her. Not just with thanks, but with something deeper, something unspoken that lingered even after the storm outside began to fade. The days that followed brought a quiet change to the rhythm of the house. Matthew, once guarded and watchful, began to seek Sarah out, not with questions about jobs or lessons, but with tales of the things that mattered to him. He told her about the hidden spot by the stream where wild black berries grew, about the time he and his dad rescued a baby cow caught in the mud, and about how he sometimes still dreamed of his mom. She listened without rushing him, never prying, letting him set the pace. Ellie, too, grew bolder. Most nights, she would climb into Sarah's lap after supper, head resting against her chest, her small body relaxing in a way that spoke of safe and trust. Sometimes she fell asleep there, the faint rise and fall of her breathing keeping time with the crackle of the fire. Luke noticed. He noticed the way Matthew laughed more easily, the way Ellie hummed as she played, the way the air in the house felt warmer even when the wind was sharp outside, and he noticed, too, the way Sarah fit into their lives without forcing her place, how she moved through the kitchen, the barn, the fields as though she had always belonged. One evening they sat down to a meal of cooked meat, potatoes, and fresh bread. It was nothing fancy, but the table was full, and so was the sound of talk. Luke caught himself smiling, the kind of smile that came without thinking. Halfway through the meal, the sound of horse feet crunching on frozen ground broke through the easy talk. Luke's smile faded. He rose and stepped to the window. 2 wagons had pulled up outside, and a group of well-dressed men and ladies were climbing down. At their center stood Mr. Whitmore, tall, silver-haired, and carrying himself like a man used to getting what he wanted. His daughter, Clara Whitmore, followed behind, her gloved hands folded neatly, eyes scanning the house with quiet figuring. Luke opened the door before they could knock. "Evening," he said flat. Whitmore tipped his hat. "Evening, Luke. We thought we might have a word." Inside, Sarah had gathered Ellie into her arms, Matthew standing close beside her. Whitmore stepped forward. "We hear you've taken in a guest. While I'm sure her wants are good, there are those in town who believe a more fitting set would good your family. My daughter," he moved toward Clara, "is ready to help raise your kids, manage your home, and see to the ranch's affairs. Luke's jaw tightened. "You're here to tell me who belongs in my home?" Whitmore's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to offer you a choice that will spare you a good deal of trouble." Luke's gaze moved from Whitmore to Clara, then back again. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "The only trouble I see is a man thinking he has the right to decide my family for me." Clara Whitmore's eyes narrowed slightly. "You think keeping a baby helper with no ties, no family, is better for your kids than giving them a mom who she is their mom?" Luke said, cutting her off. The words hung in the air, clear and solid as the winter sky. Behind him, Sarah's breath caught. Luke stepped forward, closing the space between himself and Whitmore. "The lady in that room is part of my family. She has earned her place here in ways that have nothing to do with your rules or your daughter's wants. Whatever business you thought you came here for, it ends now." For a moment, no one moved. Then, Whitmore's look shifted, the charm slipping from his face. Without another word, he turned and walked back toward the wagon. Clara followed, her chin high, but her steps quick. Luke watched them go, the cold air sharp against his skin. When he stepped back inside, Matthew was grinning openly, and Ellie still clung to Sarah's neck. Sarah met Luke's eyes, something unspoken passing between them. A shared getting that whatever storms the town might send their way, the walls of this house would hold. The fall air was crisp, carrying the mixed scents of wood smoke and apple drink. Lanterns swung from the edges of storefronts, casting warm light over the crowded main street. The Harvest Fest had drawn nearly every soul from dust empty. Ranchers in their Sunday coats, kids darting between stalls, the church singers singing near the pretty spot. Sarah walked beside Luke, her hands tucked into her wrap, still unused to the easy glances and nods she now got. Since the trouble with Briggs and the Whitmores, the sharp whispers had faded, replaced with something quieter, almost curious. Still, she had not expected Luke to bring her here tonight. They stopped near the center of the street where the townsfolks gathered between the bandstand and the general store. Music drifted on the air and laughter rippled through the crowd. Then Luke turned to her, his eyes steady. "Stay here a moment," he said, and stepped up onto the low platform beside the bandstand. The talks around them dimmed, folks turning to see the tall rancher standing in the lamplight. "Evening, folks," Luke began, his voice carrying without strain. "I will not take much of your time, but there's something I need to say where everyone can hear it." Sarah felt a flutter of unease. She stood rooted, the eyes of half the town now glancing between her and the man on the platform. Luke reached into the pocket of his coat and drew out a small, worn box. He opened it, and inside lay a gold ring, simple but elegant, the band softened by years of wear. "My mom wore this ring for most of her life," Luke said, his voice steady but warm. "She told me once that it wasn't the gold that mattered. It was what it stood for. Family, loyal, the promise to stand by each other through every hard season." His gaze swept the crowd, then found Sarah's. "I've been lucky in my life, but I've also lost more than I ever wanted to. And I know there's been talk about the lady who came to my ranch about whether she belongs there. So I'm telling you now, she does more than anyone could get from the outside looking in." He stepped down from the platform and crossed to her, the crowd parting quietly. Stopping before her, he held the ring between them. "Sarah May," he said, his voice low enough for her alone at first, then rising so all could hear. "My mom's ring is the one thing I never thought I would give away. But tonight, I'm giving it to the lady I trust to keep my family whole." For a long moment, the only sound was the faint creak of a lantern swaying overhead. Sarah felt the weight of every gaze in the street. But more than that, she felt the weight of Luke's words, solid, unshaken. Her hand trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as though it had been made for her. Luke's mouth curved into the smallest of smiles before he turned, keeping her hand in his to face the crowd. "This is my family," he said, simply. No one spoke against it. A few hats tipped in quiet respect. Someone near the bandstand began clapping, slow at first, then joined by others until the sound rolled through the street like distant thunder. Sarah stood there with the ring warm against her skin, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. For the first time since she'd come to Dust Empty, she didn't feel like she was standing on borrowed ground. The spring sun spilled gold across Callahan Ranch, setting the stream aglow and brightening fields dotted with wild flowers. Chairs stood beneath the old tall tree near the barn, plain but decorated with chains of fresh blooms. Pals from town, neighboring ranchers, and the sheriff spoke quietly, their voices drifting on the warm breeze. Inside, Sarah stood before her small mirror, smoothing the skirt of her cream-colored dress, soft cotton with a touch of lace. It felt right. For a moment, the lady staring back at her seemed far removed from the newcomer who had once stepped into Dust Empty. A knock came. Matthew peeked in. "Ready, Mama?" The word still caught her. She smiled. "I am." He offered his arm with solemn pride. "Then let's go." They stepped outside into sunlight. Ellie, in a pale yellow dress, skipped ahead, scattering petals. From a small basket, her laughter bright as morning. Matthew matched Sarah's pace, leading her toward Luke beneath the tall tree. Luke stood tall in his best shirt and dark vest, hat in hand. When their eyes met, his faint smile told her everything. "It's so good to see you." "I'm so excited," Jesse said, putting Brandon's angry eyes. The event was simple. The pastor spoke of promise in seasons, how the land stood winter, trusting in spring. Sarah heard the words, but her gaze stayed on Luke, on how his eyes never left hers. When the pastor said them hubby and wife, Luke kissed her with quiet respect, and the world seemed to fade. Claps broke out, hats lifted, and the kids ran forward. Ellie clung to Sarah's waist. Matthew grinned up at them, pride shining. Later, when chairs were cleared and the sun sank toward the hills, Sarah and Luke stood on the porch, watching the last guests ride off. The air smelled of cut dry grass and sweet flower. Luke stepped closer, resting his hand on her shoulder. His thumb brushed the fabric, small, almost without thinking, yet full of meaning. Thanks, trust, love, unspoken. She met his gaze. It was the same steady look he'd given the night he faced down Briggs, the same when he'd placed his mom's ring on her finger. In the quiet, she felt the truth of her journey. She thought of the words once whispered behind her. Baby helper with no kids. Then she thought of Matthew's hand on her arm, Ellie's laughter, Luke's touch. Now, "Oh, I used to be called a baby helper with no kids," she said softly. "Now I am a mom, a wife, and the lady a Western man was willing to draw his gun for just to protect my honor." Luke's quiet smile lit his eyes. He squeezed her shoulder once before they turned toward the house, the porch light spilling warm across the threshold of their new life. And that's how Sarah May went from whispered mean to becoming the heart of the Callahan family, proving love, loyal, and brave can turn even the harshest frontland into a true home. If this tale touched your heart, imagine the untold tales the Wild West still holds of forbidden love, quiet hero, and bonds that outlast time. Subscribe to Wild West Tales for more forgettable journeys into the dust, danger, and passion of the American front, where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. Hit the bell icon so you never miss the next ride into love's wildest trails.